for you to remain on the call. Recordings and slides will be shared afterwards on the Align group, and we'll send an email out with that. So please don't feel you have to take recordings of the slide yourself. We really engage your contribution to the webinar, and there's a number of ways that you can do that throughout the course of the next 2 hours. The first is through using the chat itself to post questions and comments. We also will have some Menti questions throughout to get some feedback on your levels of experience, some challenges that you've had and solutions that you might propose. And you're also welcome to email us after the webinar as well if you have further comments that you want to add. So on to our speakers for today. So as you can see, I'm Justine Saunders. I will be facilitating today. We have also starting off the session, Pippa Howard from Fauna and Flora International. She is the Director of Corporate Sustainability. I've just lost my notes. And next we have Mark Johnston. He is the Strategy Lead and for Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions from BP. He's also chair of the IPECA BES working group, a member of the BES expert panel on business and biodiversity. So brings a lot of experience with him today beyond just his slides. And we will next have speaking up is Dr. Rao from Tata Power. He's the head of Corporate Environment and Climate Change Department, mainly responsible for pre-project environmental activities, design engineering and statutory compliance at Tata. And then finally, we have Isaac Najera Cuenca from Repsol, really experienced both in terms of the industry, but also a strong research background with papers published on the Environmental Management Index and methodology for environmental risks and impact management. So really looking forward to seeing you sharing your slides with us today on what Repsol are doing. We've also designed it in terms of a flow because we realize there's a big range of experience throughout the whole sector. So we're starting off with perhaps those who are just starting out with exploring biodiversity measurement, all the way through to, say, Repsol, who are exploring more from the valuation side of things. So we hope we give you that breadth of experience that not everyone's right at the very sort of final end stages, but some of them are just starting out as well. So we're all on that journey together. So yeah, just an outline of the webinar agenda today. So we've been through the speakers in turn. We will then stop for breakout rooms at 2:55, sorry. Really appreciate if you can stick around for those. I know people often see that as a time for a break, but we have scheduled a proper break for you. So hopefully you can stick around for 10 minutes just to give you some insights of what you feel are the challenges for your sector, because then we can help design the Align recommendations to better deliver some of those solutions for you. So it's really important to get your feedback to make sure that Align is tailored for your needs. And then we'll have, of course, some feedback from our facilitators after the break. And then the second half, again, if you can stick around for that too, we really want to go into what those challenges are, get your feedback from those breakout rooms. What are some of the implications for decision making? What have been the lessons learned and the training and education needs? And this whole discussion section's open to everyone, so not just the speakers that you've just heard, but this is also another opportunity for yourselves to contribute. And then we wrap up and close. So we look forward to having that engagement over the next 2 hours. As I mentioned, we'll have a couple of Menti questions throughout. This is the access code to get onto Mentimeter. So it's at menti.com and the code is 83283107. And the first question we have up, which really helps us to understand the level of experience that you have, and also helps us to tailor the discussions appropriately to your level of experience, is what experience do you have in applying natural capital approaches? So some of you may be at the early stages of thinking and others at more advanced stages. So we'll give it a few minutes just to run through that. Okay, thank you for responding. We're getting a good range of a good spread, and this is what we normally see from out of the webinars. We've had a few. Oh, the Menti code is 83283107. Oh, it's at the top of the page actually. What we found from running this webinar in other sectors is we get a similar pattern. So some, most are in the middle, others at the sort of advanced stages, and some at the very beginning. Okay, well, we'll carry on from there. I'll give you a quick outline from the of the Align project itself, really briefly, because I realise I'm running behind time already. Yana, if you can just skip through to the next slide. Thank you. So the Align project, it came out of a need to really embed the value of nature within economic thinking. So we realized that the way that businesses measure and report their impacts and dependence on natural capital was limited and it lacked consistency. That was the view amongst business anyway. And there was a demand as well for changes in corporate reporting. So investors needed to have more consistent reporting from businesses on how a multidimensional view based on both their natural, social and human capitals and non-financial reporting. There was also a lot of pressure from other stakeholders. So as you're aware, there's a lot going on in the environmental sector at the moment in terms of international policy drivers, the Convention for Biological Diversity, the EU Green Deal, the EU Biodiversity Strategy, the Sustainable Development Goals. There's also a lot going on in the finance sector in terms of reporting requirements. There's the sustainability reporting organizations and also, of course, consumers wanting increased transparency. So within this whole environment, the Align project was born. And so what the Align overall objective of the Align project is to contribute to the EEC's efforts to support businesses and other stakeholders in developing standardized natural capital accounting practices generally, but for biodiversity specifically. And so at the moment, we're ultimately aiming for companies to fully assess the impacts and dependencies on nature and to express this as a value impact on human well-being. The current draft of the recommendations which we have, it starts off with biodiversity measurement and understanding what's there and how it's impacted by companies' activities, and then we'll move into valuation, primarily monitoring, but appreciating that there might be other ways of assigning value where evidence supports it. So the intention is to improve this clarity, build consensus, develop a generally accepted way for businesses to go through that process, and importantly link to existing initiatives. There's a lot of four-letter acronyms out there, 10FD and others, and EFRAG's work as well, and to just make sure that we're all connected and that we're not trying to duplicate anything or reinvent the wheel, trying to use consistent language. So moving on to the next slide. The structure of the project is has three objectives. The first one is this natural capital management accounting platform, of which this webinar is one output, facilitating best practice exchange. In objective 2, we have the development of the recommendations themselves, and they're at a draft stage and currently going through the technical hub review. And then objective 3 is defining these needs and opportunities and the challenges, and that's why the last half of the seminar today is really important for us to get that feedback on what you guys need to help you move ahead. Just a little last slide on opportunities to engage. We have a number of spheres, if you like, of the community in Align. So we have our Align Advisory Board who advise us on the direction of the project, sort of the high level direction. And then we have in the smaller centre, we have a technical hub. So these are technical experts within their field, both within consultancy, with research institutes, but also practitioners within the business community to make sure that what we develop is practical. Within that wider sphere, we have the community of practice. And so these are, again, businesses that will ultimately be applying these recommendations and have experience in doing similar sorts of procedures and processes. And then the aligned community of interest, and these are the people who just want to be aware of what's going on and be kept informed and perhaps receive any outputs. So if you're interested in receiving and being involved in any of those communities, please do contact us afterwards and we can help direct you to perhaps the best group. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Pippa just to say that initially this webinar was started off looking at the whole entire extractive sector, but we realised that we had addressed some of it in a previous webinar for the construction sector, and that included looking at raw materials. So we thought we'll start off with high level view and then we'll narrow down to energy. So I'm happy to hand over Pippa today. She's going to look more at the whole entire extractive sector, and then we'll go from there. So over to you, Pippa. Thank you very much. And just need to unmute.
Is that all good?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Justine. Well, there's several methods of accounting which aim to address the issues of sustainability, and I'm going to focus on accounting related to nature and biodiversity, as you pointed out, and in fact on target-based approaches. Because many raw materials from the sector come from mining, I'm also going to mention extractors. So the rising call for transparency and accountability from all quarters is forcing us to pay careful attention to how we impact nature and what the nature of our dependencies are, how to measure and demonstrate that operational footprints and value chains, both up and downstream, are not having deleterious effects on our on nature and can, as called for by the emerging global biodiversity framework, contribute to the recovery and protection of nature. We are now acutely aware of the central dependencies we have on nature, to our global economies, to our health and well-being and a stable climate. And this encompasses not only the ecosystem services derived from nature, but also the intrinsic values of nature itself. And we need to remember that. There was the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity and various other global and national initiatives leading up to the recent Das-Gupta report, which called for the true value of nature to be identified, named, included in accounting, etc. But the actual metrics of what this means for the extractive sector or for the energy sector have, I think, come from elsewhere. So we're seeking alignment across the measurements of our impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. This requires careful and clear definition of terms, but also consistency on the expectations of stakeholders, whether these are the government authorities, lenders and investors, or voluntary sectors and commodity initiatives, or from those, like FFI, who are keeping an eye on performance standards from within civil society. So what has the energy sector been doing about this trend, and more broadly the extractive sector, and the whole call on biodiversity and nature measurement and disclosure? Well, the extractive sector were early movers in this space, partly due to their visibility and in response to pressures from their stakeholders, but also due to the relative visibility and ease of identification of direct site-level impacts and how these relate to things like access to finance and social license to operate. The extractive sector is also an early mover in picking up on target-based approaches and committing to these sort of ideologies or targets like net positive impact or net gain and no net loss of biodiversity. And to do this, they were early adopters of the mitigation hierarchy and attempting to measure impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. This, I think, was as much to define the impacts, what those impacts were, but also actually to understand the orders of magnitude of the mitigation and compensation actions required in response. Now, if we look across the mining and energy sector as a whole, the top performers in the mining sector are those that are aligned through the CEO-led membership of the International Council for Mining and Metals, which requires no net loss commitments to biodiversity and various levels of disclosure. But we're yet to see the kind of equivalent of that in the energy sector. And although a few companies now, and we have them on this call today, are demonstrating leadership with overt commitments to net positive impact and alignment to global biodiversity framework, there are still laggards. Now, over the years, there have been a number of initiatives to benchmark the sector. The Natural Value Initiative, driven by Annalisa Grigg when she was at FFI, and then picked up latterly by ICMM, and then there's something more recent from the Responsible Mining Initiative, where mining companies are ranked according to their sustainability performances. But for the energy sector, it seems that the Dow Jones Sustainability Index has been one that has been the go-to, but I've also found one more recently on the Global Benchmarking Alliance, and there's a little bit more on biodiversity there. But biodiversity is still absent in many of the smaller and medium-sized extractives and energy companies. However, legal frameworks are changing rapidly, and many countries are now committing to sort of more nature-positive, target-based approaches. So, there is an expectation that more will follow. There's certainly a lot more questions coming from investors doing their due diligence processes. And I think, the likes of JP Morgan and BlackRock are really asking good questions now. In my view, much of the progress has been made on measuring impacts and dependencies grew out of the strength of performance standard requirements of the International Finance Corporation, and they really did set a lot of the methodologies. So the application of Performance Standard 6, focusing on biodiversity, for example, demands identification and quantification of impacts and dependencies on nature, right down to species level, and also looking at ecosystem services, which brings, to mind the kind of whole stocks and flows story of natural capital accounting. So the accounting methodologies require attention to good baseline data, something we all need to give due attention to. And we need careful identification of metrics and indicators which can be threaded right through the entire life of a project into operation and into closure and decommissioning as part of a strong monitoring and evaluation programs that then feed back into successful iterative adaptive management of the kind of plans you put in place to manage biodiversity and nature in a business. And without data coming out of the baselines and good data coming out of baselines and feeding into monitoring and evaluation programs, measurement and disclosure are utterly impossible. So, we talked a little bit earlier about the business case, but the business case has really become so clear that now perhaps it's not even worth talking about anymore, because the rise of nature in the World Economic Risk Report, for example, you can see here over a decade has a little overdue, but right here it is, the top right-hand corner. And Justine mentioned the Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures, which really has a relationship now with the Science-Based Targets for Nature initiative. And this is one of the disclosure measurement frameworks drawing on corporate investment performance in nature-based exposures. Progress on defining what actually this means to a company is starting to come together, with working groups getting to grips with some of the details. But what I worry about is the practical application of the framework and how this is translated from action on the ground to reporting and disclosure, and then how this feeds down backwards from disclosure into pragmatic, clearly defined delivery of nature positive activities and initiatives to an operational level through the whole value chain, actually. So, the big question is, what are those targets and what are we trying to achieve through these different initiatives and frameworks? Well, ultimately, they need to be nested within the global biodiversity framework. That gives that sort of cohesion. And this needs to provide the incentives and obligations into national jurisdictional targets that then go down to landscape and ecosystem level, down to site level, and, understanding and dealing with direct and indirect impacts and threats to nature. So defining metrics and measures of biodiversity in nature and using natural capital accounting is clearly fundamental. What are the units of measurement and how do they talk to each other? What currencies do we need and how do we maintain the integrity of these so that it's clear there's a clear connect between what's happening on the ground and what is then reported on, so from site to corporate level and then beyond. And another key factor, sort of, I guess, the holy grail of biodiversity measurement is what units and metrics make sense at different scales and how these two nest within each other to provide opportunity for monitoring and evaluation of, and the data and information and performance. And as a stakeholder, I'm really interested in three things. One is the effort that an entity is making towards managing biodiversity, so the kind of effort they're doing. Two, the reduction of avoidance of impacts or other threats to nature. And thirdly, creating a positive change. Can they, what is the state of biodiversity? So it's a classic pressure state response framework that I think we need. Making this efficient and meaningful and valid requires robust scientific approaches, but how much is needed and what kind of data is really sufficient to enable good accounting? This example is taken from Anglo American, which was used for the first phase of a project we're doing with WCMC, looking at site-based indicators for biodiversity. And it provides a kind of dashboard that's underpinned by proper data on species and habitats and stuff. And we're now involved in taking site-level approaches into another phase, looking at more corporate disclosures and aggregating these through the system. And that's really important because if we're able to do that serially across operations and projects, we can then report into the likes of the Task Force for Financial Disclosures using the sort of science-based targets approaches. What I'd like to see more of, though, are signs in this whole reporting mechanism. And I know many of you have seen this slide before, but it's really about data coming through on really fundamental elements of biodiversity in nature: ecological intactness, ecological health and resilience, landscape and habitat connectivity, species richness or irreplaceability, so that we can start to get the data using remote sensing, eDNA, smart technologies and stuff that help us to gather and manage this. And this is really about looking after the stock of natural capital that will ensure the resilience in the face of climate change and all the threats, but also enable the continued flows of services that we're really dependent on. Now, before I'm going to hand over to Mark on the panel, I've just got to mention nature positive again, and a little bit more explicitly. There is a lot of talk about nature positive and what this means in terms of natural capital accounting and disclosure. And I really just want to emphasize that nature positive is not a shortcut to being able to claim credit for gains made in nature, because it really needs to look at the full influence of a company, all the raw materials, the value chains, the aspects of impact and dependency. So as a renewable energy company, or you need to look at where your materials are coming from, and that in a way is part of the responsibility of being nature positive. For an extractive company, this means knowing more about the provenance and pathways of materials and supply chains, but also where and how in the markets your products are being used. What is the natural capital footprint? And in many ways, this is equivalent, I guess, to the Scope 3 emissions for nature, but has a really systemic level of commitment to integrating nature into decision-making and influence beyond immediate operational practices. Nature positive could be a way of describing the sort of stock-based target, or could be a way of framing an entire corporate ESG strategy. It provides a really excellent opportunity for framing the same issues in a holistic way, balancing a focus or maximizing natural capital stocks, including biodiversity, and a focus on optimizing environmental flows, starting, I would suggest, perhaps with water and climate regulation. But the bottom line is that we need to underpin natural capital accounting with information and data. The currencies we use and choose may vary, but they really need to be consistent, and we need to make sure that they're clear. So that's the message I'm sort of giving today, Justine. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite Mark Johnson, who's strategy lead for nature-based solutions and biodiversity at BP, to talk to us about what he's got to say today. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you much, Pippa. And I think that's a great introduction and segue into some of the work we're doing in BP. So thanks, everybody. So hi, basically, I'm Mark Johnson. I'm strategy lead for biodiversity and nature-based solutions in BP in our corporate environmental team. Are you able to share the slides so I can go through? Great, thank you. So going to the first slide before I go into, if you just go on to the next one. Before I sort of go into detail what we're doing in this space, I just want to give an overview of really what we're doing in terms of biodiversity position in BP. So 18 months ago now, we issued our biodiversity position, which is summarised here. There's more details on our website, and further details are there available. And then last year, we integrated that biodiversity position into our new sustainability frame, which covers a much wider area than obviously biodiversity. The sustainability frame covers water, circularity, supply chain, and nature-based solutions. And again, full details are not on our website. And now we're at the stage of obviously taking that position and implementing it. At a very high level, just a summary of what that position actually includes. We have our overall aim is to making a positive impact biodiversity through our actions to restore, maintain, and enhance biodiversity where we work. And that's broadly divided down to three overall objectives. The first one, and probably the main one we're focusing on at the moment, is the aim to achieve a net positive impact on biodiversity in our new projects. That kicked off from January this year. So this is not just those projects in sensitive areas, it's all projects where we operate globally across oil and gas, renewables, etc. And then we've set specific targets around that. Now, what we are doing at the moment is actually what we have been doing, actually been working with PIPA and FFI and the Biodiversity Consultancy, also on the line, in developing our NPI methodology, which I can talk briefly about in a second, because it links very much to the metrics and measuring piece. So we're now implementing that objective. Our second objective is around our operations, our existing operations, and we're building out a series of biodiversity enhancement plans at those operational sites. With sort of process-related targets, which I outlined there. And the third objective is about supporting biodiversity projects in countries where we have existing or growing investments, and that's more the typically supporting biodiversity conservation projects, initiatives by NGOs or local communities in those particular countries. So that's broadly where we want to be, what we're aiming to achieve, and now we're very much at the stage of implementing and integrating that position and the wider sustainability aims into our practices, into projects. So a little bit of overview. So I was asked to, first of all, give a brief summary of what's motivating us for measuring biodiversity, and then a little bit about the methodologies we're applying. Well, the number one behind motivation is the need to demonstrate delivery of our aim and objectives. We've put those aims and objectives out there, and now we need to show and demonstrate that we are actually delivering on those objectives, on the aim and those objectives. So that's an internal driver, but also, of course, there's the external one, which Pippa and others have already highlighted. There's a huge amount going on in this space at the moment externally, Global Biodiversity Framework, SBTN, TNFD, and increasing pressures and demands from our customers, clients, investors to be reporting on our impact on biodiversity. So that's also another sort of key driver motivating us to be looking at how we measure biodiversity. So the methodologies we're applying, and actually Pippa's mentioned one of these already, and this is where we've been involved in the UNEP WCMC work on biodiversity indicators for site-based impacts. That guidance is out and available. And what we've been doing is taking elements of that guidance and integrating it into our existing systems and processes internally in BP. So you can probably imagine, a large company like BP, we have our existing processes and procedures in place for managing these things. We don't want to reinvent a completely new one, but what we're doing is taking a lot of these guidance and integrating it into what we have already. And that's what we've been doing over the number of years. To flag two pieces for that. The first one, of course, is about screening. And screening for biodiversity sensitivities very early on in a project. And also what we're also doing now is actually getting it into the investment decisions. So when we're actually making these very early decisions on whether we invest in, I don't know, an LNG plant in Southeast Asia, getting it into those decision-making processes right early on as well. And then the other piece about the site level targets and metrics. So at a moment, you'll see from the biodiversity position, it is up to individual sites or projects to identify net positive impact targets and then identify the metrics appropriate depending on the nature of the project or the impacts that site is actually happening, is actually like to have. So obviously there we're using that sort of understanding those metrics and understanding what measures can be done for that particular project. You'll also see from the position that at the moment our targets, our corporate targets at the moment, are process-based. And that's largely to drive action in embedding sort of biodiversity in the position into the way we work across BP. We do, of course, recognise there's a lot of work going on, SBTN, TNFD, etc., about outcome-based targets. And I suspect we may move to those outcome-based targets once there's sort of more universal agreement about what those targets may be, so that we can then align or be consistent with things that must come out of the GBF, etc. So that's one area of work we're working on at the moment. And the final one is about natural capital, so obviously slightly wider. And we've been using the natural capital protocol to try and identify and help us understand what the material impacts and dependencies and impacts are in our energy value chains. To have that sort of materiality assessment and using the natural capital protocol for that. The challenge we have is, in BP, we've probably got at least 100 or more value chains, depending on products, services, whether it's renewables or oil and gas, etc. Each of those value chains may have 10 or more different components within them. So it soon gets quite complicated in terms of understanding how you do that materiality assessment across such large companies as ourselves. And in that, we have about 55,000 suppliers in our books. So, how do you start trying to value the biodiversity impacts and dependencies over such large value chains? And that's where we are at the moment in terms of how we do that at a corporate level. So that's a very quick summary overview of where we are. Obviously, happy to take questions and some of the challenges on that. Pippa, am I passing back to you?
Yes, Mark, thank you very much. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm allowed as chair to ask a quick question, as I am. Can I do that? Just seems nodding. So, Mark, I just wanted to ask you, the very different scales of projects that you mentioned, different geographies. And I wanted to ask if you've got any idea of some clever innovations and technologies that you may be sort of thinking about to apply to kind of helping to measure and monitor biodiversity.
Yeah. Great. No, thank you for that. So absolutely. So we are. We actually have a work stream within our innovation and engineering team looking at these sort of new technologies and apply them, because some of the biggest cost to us is actually the monitoring piece, measuring and monitoring side of things. So we are looking at that. Also, we are looking at applications of eDNA and how we can use eDNA to monitor changes in the health of the ecosystem, and then can we link that to individual metrics? The other challenge, which I didn't mention, is that actually probably roughly 80% of our operations are in the marine environment. So actually having baseline data is critically important also to achieve an understanding of MPI, net gain, but also collecting that data in the first place is really challenging. So I think the real exciting piece is about how can we use eDNA to do that. What we're also looking at is how can we actually then also link that into satellite imagery for land-based activities, and how do we monitor changes from satellite at a much more holistic level, if you like, down to the site level by using eDNA. So those areas we are certainly looking at, and I think there's some really exciting areas in that space.
That's fantastic, thank you. Right, I will get back to some more questions later, but I'm going to ask Ivaturi Rao to come on board and give us from Tata. So I hope you're ready to your presentation, and can I hand over to you?
Thank you. Give me a minute. Are you able to hear me?
A little bit broken, but try again.
Are you able to hear me?
I think so. Let's give it a go, and I'll let you know if we have a problem.
Okay.
Can't hear you now. I tell you what we could. Do you want to? Hello.
Dr. Rao, are you going to try and share your slides? Is that what you're trying to do? Oh, there we go. Sounds promising. There we go. Yes, we can see your slides.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And good evening to you as well, Dr. Rao. Thank you for joining so late in your evening.
Good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share our experience, the Tata Power experience in the biodiversity measurement and natural capital accounting. Thank you once again. Before I proceed, I just wanted to confirm, because I'm in a full screen mode. If anybody raises their hand or something like that, please stop me in between the presentation. I'll take 10 to 15 minutes to explain you what we do. Is the slides are visible? Is it okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
In fact, regarding this theme, I just wanted to brief you. I have taken over this charge of head of environment recently, in the sense recent 6 years back, before we do this study. In fact, this core activity was done by Mr. Ashwini Kumar and Vishwasra Vivek and Janvi Vivalkar. The entire exercise has been done by these 3 team members. But all of them are on board, and that any questions regarding the processes or whatever it is, they'll be able to answer you, and they'll be able to help me in any queries if it is required. Going ahead, I just wanted to brief you about the Tata Power. Tata Power basically is a multinational conglomerate, and in fact, it's a holding company headquartered at Mumbai. And in fact, more than 30 publicly listed Tata enterprises are there, which includes Tata Steel, Tata Motors, Tata Consultancy Services, Tata Power and Tata Chemicals, Tata Global Beverages. Like this, there are 30 companies are there. And in fact, we employ more than 6 lakhs, more than 7 lakhs of people in operations across the domestic as well as the international arenas. Having said this, I will just quickly go through the natural capital valuation of the hydropower projects. In fact, Tata Power has hydropower projects both in India as well as international places. And we have chosen up one of the hydropower project, which is in close to Mumbai. That is Khopoli hydroelectric power plant. In Bhira and Bhipuri, these hydroelectric power plants are being chosen. And to carry this exercise in a systematic way, following the national capital collation procedure. In the process, what we did is we have identified we have carried the exercise by asking the questions why we are doing it, rather the why question, and then what we are doing and how we are measuring them, and in what way we will apply to our business sense once we arrive at a capital value of a natural capital value in a business sense. While doing this, we were guided by, or rather, we were controlled by the Tata Group policy and philosophies. And we have identified all the activities which are affecting, rather, they having the impact drivers and dependencies, and we mapped them. And we have carried out the monetary value of each of the activities in the HEP, and then the ecosystem services which they provide. And we applied this, once we do this calculation, we try to apply this in the decision processing of the business. I'll just briefly go to one of the policies, what we have, the frame, rather the why question. In the Tata sustainability policy is there. In fact, it has a strategic planning, and we do the risk management and the supply chain engagement also. And communication and disclosures we carry. And while doing so, while doing various activities in this, while adhering to the corporate sustainability policy, we conduct the assessment over a period of time and then arrive at the values. While doing this natural capital assessment journey, we have identified what is the value chain and what are the operations in which affect the value and what is the value perspective, and what type of value are the monetary terms or in the rupee terms, how it gets converted into. And the various impacts we have considered in the process is the land, forest, because it is in the hydroelectric project, and land, forest, agricultural loss, soil erosion, aquatic system, as well as the societal impact. The dependencies we consider basically fresh water and the land use. Having said this, the methodology which has been adopted is basically followed the net present value calculation as is being done under the government of India. And in fact, the net present value as on date is being calculated based on the annual benefits and the cost of the forest in 1 year. And in fact, over a period of time, that is the life of the project, the number of years in which the annual benefit of the forest will accrue, that is also considered and the social rate of discount. Basing on the cost factor which has been assumed, and the cost of the national capital has been determined. While determining this cost, there are various forests which exist in the region, and different types of forests and different types of value of the goods and services which have been provided, which have been considered. Under the Government of India net present value also, we consider about 6 types of different forests, and then the products which includes the services which provide these forests also have been considered in an elaborate way. And but for want of time, I don't want to brief into the more details what we did in the exercise. And having said this, the ecological services which have been mapped in this, and then whatever we have included, I have shown you on the inclusions part, which is the timber, firewood, fodder, and then carbon storage, carbon sequestration, and the exclusions part. And having said that, we have allowed the monetary value of the natural capital value of the services, forest services, as well as the loss of agricultural and loss of fodder. And this is a percentage proportionate to the value which has been arrived, and this has been used in the business applications. The various applications which natural capital value which has been used in the business is basically shadow pricing, which is my predecessor also is saying the same thing. The shadow pricing we are using in the internal carbon pricing we are working out, and in fact this internal carbon pricing will be carrying out. And in the sourcing and procurement of supply chain management, which directly is not applicable in the hydroelectric project, but still we do. And the product design, yes, in fact, we have carried out the scenario planning and enterprise management software. In fact, we have in the plans to do this. This is what I wish to share with you. I'm open for the questions, whatever is which I'm able to answer. Maybe my colleagues also will help me to answer the queries. Please, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to have your inputs there. And there's been obviously a lot of work have gone into the natural capital accounting and subscriber. I have a question for you, just initially, and that is really around the difference. So we've had, Mark and I myself as well was talking around sort of the biodiversity data and metrics, and this is much more values-based approach rather than a targets-based approach. So trying to find the right currency, and then essentially you have a monetary value that is applied, and that helps to create the business case. So I just wanted to get a sense from you around how straightforward was the methodology, and have you when working out these sort of values for the natural capital, have you reverted in any way back to sort of traditional biodiversity data and metrics as well?
Sorry, maybe if I put your question, what you are asking me is what are the values we have accumulated, or whether whatever we have accounted in the determination of NCV value, how reliable they are. Is that the question? Yes, in fact, please.
Yes. I mean, it's really about how you found the approach, because it's all about utility and trying to have consistency of approaches, and we've got a number of different approaches that coming through.
Yeah, as far as the monetary values of the services and the products, whatever we have considered, there was an elaborate process which has been evolved by the various institutions in India, the forest departments and the Ministry of Environment and Forest. In fact, various other research institutes have arrived for a different cost for each of the activities, basing on which we have arrived at the monetary value of the NCV value. That is what we say, NCV value we have arrived at. That maybe Janvi or Vivek can help me to explain this. Please, Janvi, you can add on that. You can add on that.
Yes, please, welcome. If you have an additional comment to make on that.
Please.
Yeah. So the NPV value we calculated, and sorry, I mean, I missed in between conversation, I guess. So we are saying that how much is the value we have arrived from this exercise is that can be replicated?
I was asking about how you found the methodology. Just, was it complicated? Was it difficult? Was it quite challenging to find the information that fed into the methodology? I'm just, just to get a sense of how that.
Yes, the methodology part, the challenging, yes, it was a bit challenging, because the project we decided for the value calculation is having the forest services also. I mean, if you could have understood the entire impact of this, the entire overall boundary of this project was huge, and so to have everything accounted and to have everything into the having value for each and everything was, yes, just a bit challenging. Patil sir, if you want to add something on it.
I will try to answer.
Yeah.
This exercise was done as a pilot project for our lake, which is almost 95-year old. So it is before the lake there was a river, and there were forests around. So we divided that area into three parts. The submerged area we divided into three parts. One is forest, one is grass for agricultural land, and one is for grass and other things. Okay. So we calculated agricultural income based on the present values. What is the crop? How much it cost? That is one. As far as grass is concerned, we used similar methodologies, and as far as forest is concerned, the data is available. That Janvi, which agency? I don't remember that. Bhopal, Indian.
Dehradun Forest.
Correct. So that agency, they have very nice report, and then they then they have some few forests and many services which Mr. Rao has shown the slides. So what we did, we picked up what is the type of forest is that we selected the area and then we converted that type of service, that type of forest into the currency. So that is how we converted all these things. It was pilot project. Initially, it was challenging for us because we were not knowing how to start. Because in fact, in 2016, we conducted one program on natural capital, and whatever we learned, we applied in this pilot project. Janvi was also part of that program. It was 6 years back. So this is how we started how to calculate the capital. It may not be accurate methodology, but we made efforts to ensure that whatever our numbers are there, maybe these are near. And then NPV, it is last 95 years.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much.
Just to add.
Sorry, yes, just last quickly.
Yeah. Just to add to what Mr. Patil said, that we also have a baseline data with us, and now we are comparing that baseline data with today's data and see the difference, what difference it has made.
Fantastic.
On biodiversity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what this is showing is that there are these different forms and different ways to measure, and it's you know, each one has its challenges, because the outcomes are only as good as the data that goes in, and how readily you can actually get that sort of information. Without further ado, thank you so much for that. We'll come back, I think, in the discussion later. I'm going to hand over to Isaac Najera, who is going to talk to us. Isaac, you're all from Repsol, and I'm sure you'll give us an introduction to your company, and thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today. Today, I would like to present you with our methodology for valuing and accounting impacts on natural capital, that it's called REITs. After 5 years working on the idea and on the method, we decided to create a digital tool. That is what I'm going to show and present today. That is fully intended to improve business decision making by valuing and accounting impacts on natural capital. Our intent was to confirm against the Natural Capital Protocol and the ISO 148/2019 on monetary valuation of environmental impacts. And the whole methodology, the whole tool is intended to generate some nature-based KPIs and metrics grouped by ecosystem services, water resources, climate change, and social well-being. And the first three are intrinsically linked with biodiversity. Our approach has been peer-reviewed by the United Nations Environmental Programme, by the WCMC, and we also had some third-party review with the Capitals Coalition. And right now it's a digital product that is fully owned by Repsol, and it's being commercialized by an IT company, Indra. So the valuation and accounting method follows a tiered approach that is quite basic in its conceptualization. The first thing that we do is to identify impacts on ecosystem services, climate, water, and well-being. And by taking the first three different pieces of them, we can calculate impact on biodiversity. Then we go to the quantification stage, that basically we take on hectares, cubic meters, tons, decibels. Those are the traditional metrics that we use to estimate and to quantify our impacts. And then the next step is when magic comes and happens at this evaluation stage, to try to understand, and I say try to understand, the gain or loss of natural capital both in monetary terms and custom built metrics. So we try to do a blended approach. And finally, which is at the end of the day, the most important piece for us is try to manage our impacts by the application of the mitigation hierarchy, based on cost-benefit methods, not only for the company, but for the society as a whole. Just to give you an idea of what kind of impacts we are evaluating for all the value chain of the energy company, we take into consideration nearly 120 impacts from physical presence, emissions, discharges of all nature, use of resources, all kind of noise, both onshore and offshore, and obviously all the hazardous materials and waste that are generated in our operations are considered from a natural capital accounting point of view. The quantification starts with what we call the biophysical impact units, that basically is calculating the impact in these traditional metrics. For the ecosystem services, we use hectares, decibels, and tons of contaminants that may reach the ecosystems. For climate change, we use tons of CO2 equivalent. For water resources, we use cubic meters after the net balance. For social well-being, we use tons of emitted chemicals to air, water, and soil. I think it's a battery of 200 chemicals that have been quantified based on environmental prices accounting. And obviously, this tool can help you to calculate your impacts with some calculations. So there are a lot of models embedded within the solution to make our life easier when we try to run a natural capital assessment, but we also can go for direct inputs if we have, for example, an environmental impact assessment or any kind of historical records that we want to evaluate. For the evaluation stage, and I'm just showing some, let's say, screenshots of the application, we try to understand the natural capital gain or loss through two metrics. And the first one is the monetary value in US dollars of 2018. The time is important here because all the values, as my former colleagues from Tata were saying, are transformed into net present value. So we use US dollars from 2018, and starting from that, we go up into the escalation of the monetization. And also we use what is called impact units that are basically calculated from the EEVs to improve the evaluation accuracy and representativeness. And we come into that by using local adjustments that obviously, as you all know, cannot be subjected to monetary valuation. If there is some flag species, or there is a protected habitat, or there is any kind of, let's say, managerial action that need to be agreed with some stakeholders, those things are not typically captured in the, let's say, databases that we typically use for the natural capital accounting. So there is kind of a transformation that is very important for us. And as you can see, we have a timeline, we have a scale of impact, and this timeline from 2020 to 2050 try to represent the impact of an EMP field in this case, being the green bars, the impact on climate, the light blue is ecosystem services, then water is the other blue, and the dark, almost black, is the impact on well-being. This is the cumulative curve of natural capital loss over the years. There are a number of different screens, but this information is very useful for us because we have like the footprint of this impact, and it is cumulative to all our impacts within the Repsol portfolio. You can see different case studies with different countries, different projects. All of these projects have their own natural capital assessment with the gain or loss over the time, and you have many ways of understanding that footprint. And this is all about of understanding your footprint. As per the valuation database that we use, we are using MPV values again. We are for ecosystem services, we are use the CISES grouping, the European Union CISES grouping. We use 8 provisioning, 8 regulating, and 4 cultural services. And we try to do some local adjustments of these main biomes that we use for this. We are crossing just the 18 main biomes of the world with some information in dollars per hectare per year. We cross these values with this census grouping, and then we adjust all these cross through what we call the intra-biome adjustment, that basically is the net primary production of the population density. And then we do some ecosystem services adjustments, such as materiality, percentage of detraction, taking into consideration the importance of that impact to that ecosystem services. And finally, the recovery time. It is very important to say that not all services immediately recover under the stress that you put on with an impact. So we are trying to capture that. The integration of local context is very important in this case because we use the biodiversity richness, such as the species number, the risk status, thinking of metrics such as the UCN star metric are considered within this tool, and many other approaches for understanding the genetic pool of species. And obviously, as Pipa mentioned, the ecosystem quality and resilience is critical. So we try to capture some of these things in the evaluation, and finally, the social dependence and appreciation. Same approach for carbon pricing. It's a social cost of carbon. We try to put a value on the carbon with a social perspective, and part of this goes directly to biodiversity impacts. Again, the same with water risk pricing. We try to understand the net present value of reduced water abiotic services, including habitat maintenance, recreational use, and chemical regulation, which is pretty linked to biodiversity issues. And finally, what we call environmental contamination pricing. That is something that we work with the Delft Institute. And basically, we calculate the net present value of emitted pollutants that may impact human health as a whole, as a community, is a social cost. And we think that it matches perfectly with a natural capital protocol and with a natural capital approach. As you can see, for carbon prices, there is no integration with local context, but for water risk and for environmental contamination, there are a lot of different things that need to be considered, such as scarcity, demand, dependency, baseline levels, dispersion conditions, affected population. All these things will help you to do a proper natural capital assessment for one project, from one asset, or at corporate level. And yes, it's biodiversity inclusive. As I mentioned, from ecosystem services, from water resources, from climate impacts, all these three pieces play together an important role into the natural capital assessment. But from those three, we try to see what percentage of that impact goes directly towards biodiversity. Can be gain, can be loss. In most cases, as you can see, this is one of the screenshots that you can see, saying that for this specific project, the 28% of the impacts are towards the biodiversity, and the 70.1 is other impacts on other attributes of the or valued environmental components. And also can be understood over the timeline. These bars represent natural capital detraction, being this light blue, the corresponding part of biodiversity within the natural capital. And when it comes negative, that means that it's a nature positive impact. I mean, we are generating positive impacts by a kind of restoration project, by an offset, by doing many different approaches that can be used, generally speaking, in our industry, trying to capture within the tool. And this is the last slide. It's basically why this tool was born is this. We really wanted, and if I can bring your attention to this line, this is again a timeline. This is the scale of the impact. These gray bars are the production profile of an E&P field, exploration and production oil and gas field. This gray dark line is the yearly impact of that field. And this is light blue is the impact of that field after implementing additional mitigation actions, can be avoidance, reduction, restoration, or offsettings. And, businesses, our upper management is always asking, okay, what else I can do with a reduced budget that we typically have? I mean, we have a budget that can be spent, and we try to help the upper management to make informed decisions on how to bend the curve of our impacts, just trying to make it net zero and then to make positive impacts, both in biodiversity, both at natural capital level. So we are following this approach that first we identify the impacts, we identify the impact mitigation options, we select if it is an avoidance, a reduction, a restoration, or an offset. We assign an overall performance of either reduction of that impact once we implement that mitigation measure, and we run a CBA, a cost-benefit analysis, taking into consideration the CAPEX, OPEX, and ABEX, I mean, expenditure of that mitigation measure. I mean, that this is real-world economics versus the natural capital economics. And we begin to generate KPIs and metrics to make informed decisions and say, okay, we need to invest this amount of money in the next few years or in the long run, just to make sure that we bend the curve and just to get to this project or at company portfolio level reaching zero, we need to invest this money in this mitigation action. So we are doing this probably in 30 to 40 projects right now. So we are implementing this wide the company. So for us, the motivations of making this during the last 5 years has been already explained, but the differential value for us is that the first thing is that it's very practical. We are trying to embed sustainability within the heart of the business. Directors are learning to use this tool, are learning to make informed decisions about this. They now understand the concept of natural capital, and they have KPIs and metrics that they understand. The second thing is that is scalable, is programmed in a recognized environment. I mean, the solution is robust and scalable, which is really good. It's consistent because it adheres to the state-of-the-art protocols. And this is very important because when it comes to make decisions, always comes questions. And we need to make sure that we have the right answers to that question, saying, okay, don't worry, this is being reviewed, this is endorsed, this is following the best-in-class or the state-of-the-art protocols, so on and so forth. Because not only our upper management is asking about this, obviously investors and stakeholders are coming to us asking about our approach and how we are mitigating natural capital risk by implementing REITs. And finally, and it's something that came along the way, we are calculating offsets and compensation measures, not only for CO2 capture, but we are learning how to calculate the ecosystem services and biodiversity that we generate by improving the environment under certain circumstances. So that's why we are using this tool. So thanks for having me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. There's lots of messages to you, Isaac, on the chat. But I'm going to pick up on one question initially, and I know Justine, we're running out of time for your break, so I'll make it quick. So that was great. Do you consider your scope 3, the sort of downstreams sort of elements of impacts and dependencies in this? Or do you limit yourself to site level and direct operations to assess?
It's direct impact of our sites in most cases, but we go further downstream, specifically with waste management. We consider all this scope 3 in waste management approach. We double accounting, or we try not to double account things, but when it comes to waste management, yeah, we do consider scope 3. So, and we are moving towards scope 3, generally speaking, but as Mark said, it's extraordinarily complex. So right now it's direct impact of our direct operations, and for waste management, we go for scope 3, yeah.
That's great. And just to quickly, you mentioned the uptake by senior management, and then it's sort of it has its own logic and its own business case really, and it's proved itself. When it comes to kind of one of the things I pointed out is how does that all feed back down to sort of actions on the ground, and how much of it is translated through sort of iterative processes into improving management actions on the ground at site level?
That is kind of a mixed feedback. So managers are taking this for the good, and they fully understand. There are some others that are pretty resistant to implement these science-based targets. So, but at the end of the day, for those that are not believers at the very beginning, I'm trying to help them by giving facts, and it's helping them to demonstrate that they are reducing their impacts by investing their money in a smart way. So for those that are not truly believers that they are doing green stuff, it's that you are doing good economics for your project. So for both sides, you can get to them, and finally we made it at a few attempts, but was not an easy way. Or it took us a couple of years to fully convince everyone to be on board.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Isaac, and thank you so much, Pippa, for chairing that session. So much great discussion, and we will continue that in the second half. And I'm sure we'll come more into some of the challenges that you faced, Isaac. There's also a lot of requests for links to your methodology in the chat, and if you could give people a link, that'd be great. I think also David is also trying to give you that link as well. I will go straight now into the breakout rooms because I realise we're running behind time, and now my facilitators tuned up early and now probably running what they're doing with their time. So in our breakout rooms, we're going to be your facilitator would discuss 3 questions with you: your main motivations for implementing or learning about natural capital management accounting, so what's brought you here today and what you're trying to achieve, the main challenges that organizations are coming across, and you've heard some of those already, right from the very beginning to the more sophisticated end of the spectrum, and what do you think are some of the solutions to these challenges. And it may be a little early to be discussing solutions. We can go into that in more detail in the second half as well, and I will keep talking while Jana slowly starts separating, sorting out the breakout rooms, because she's doing this live. She's never sure who's actually going to turn up for a webinar, so we can't predetermine it. So she's just doing it off the cuff. So
thanks, Justine. So I'm now going to open the breakout room. Should all be fine, and I suggest we keep the 10-minute discussions, right? So we'll have till 3:18, and then we'll squeeze a few minutes from the break, and then we'll get back to report back on your discussions.
Thank you.
So, and if you're having, it's opening now. So, and if you're having any technical issues, I'll be here a few seconds. But otherwise, I'll, happy to help. But I'm also joining your breakout room to facilitate the discussion.
Thank you, Anna.
Hi there. Hi, Lucian. You're muted.
Okay. No.
So
I was not able to access the breakout room. I don't know why.
Yeah, so the rooms are still opening a few. So give it a few seconds, and then I'm gonna see how I can assign the rest of us that are all here. But usually what's the problem sometimes is that you can you have a separate window open, and you like hover over your Teams icon, and then you can go to a different window which maybe says on hold, and you can just join that.
Yeah, I don't see any extra window. Actually, I also didn't see the chat today. I don't know.
Are you on a Mac?
I'm on a Mac.
Oh my God, I've always had issues with people on Macs. I know I love it as well to work with it, but it's, yeah. Can you try to leave the call and then join again so I can reassign you to another breakout?
Yes, I've just done this. Also, I have another computer that is not a Mac, but then I don't have the app. Do you think, is it good to change to another but use the navigator in a Windows computer? What do you think? What's
I
best?
think I would just like leave this call and then just join again with the link.
Okay.
Does that work?
But using the app, okay.
Or you can just use the web browser. That's also an option.
Yeah, if I use the browser, so I move to the other computer so I can use the chat. Okay. So I will leave for now.
All right.
Hello? Yana, are you there? Lucienne, were you assigned a breakout room? Were you given a breakout room?
Yes, yeah, we are all in a breakout room, right?
No, I don't think so. I think this is just the main room. So I think
Yeah, we
everyone's
are the
been
remaining. Oh, we are the remaining. Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe we can have the discussion anyway. So so the first question was main motivations for learning about or implementing natural capital management accounting. So what are your main motivations?
mute. I'm an independent consultant and trainer and researcher on sustainable finance. And I have started to focus on biodiversity and natural capital finance a little bit since 2019, but much more in 2020 because I worked for the TNFD accelerator team based on Global Canopy at that point. And then I engaged with stakeholders from South America and Africa. And now I'm a member, my company is a member of the forum of TNFD. So I've been learning to multiply knowledge among financial institutions and other stakeholders on this topic, basically.
Yeah, and so are you actually implementing not like I don't know what's the core of your business, but
yes, so
are you helping companies
the core of my business is what I explained: consulting, research and training. So my role in this topic is to, I'm not a company, I'm sure there are not only companies in Align, right? I'm a professional, so I learn to multiply to others who want to implement, especially financial institutions.
Yeah, and what are
Hello, welcome back, everyone. We'll take a 5-minute break now. I hope you you managed to get all your points across in the breakout rooms, but if not, there's also Menti questions coming up where you can repeat some of those your responses to those questions. But please take a 5-minute break and we'll see you back here at 2:28 or 3:28. Sorry, if you're in European time. It's only 5 minutes. Thank you. And apologies to facilitators for keeping you on so late. If you're okay to stay on, that's great. If you're not, please just maybe pass your notes to me in a chat or email. If you have to jump off now and go to your other calls.
Hey, Justine, maybe for people joining who came in a bit later, so we're having a break until.
Okay, some people came from breakout rooms a bit late.
Yeah,
Sorry,
they
I
come
started
in
too
like
soon.
one after the other. No worries.
Okay, so we'll come back in 5 minutes time. So I was going to say 2:28 now, 4 minutes time, if that's okay.
That's good.
Or 3:28 in your time. And Isaac, if you're listening in still, there was a lot of request for your outline as, I think, training material almost, a good guideline for others. And just for those returning from any breakout rooms belatedly, we're just taking a short break and we'll be back in, well, 2 minutes now, if that's okay.
Ah, you're here, I think.
Oh, great, you made it back. Thanks, Pippa.
Sorry, I'm on another system. I just got locked out, so you know, all good.
Oh,
So
good.
we're back in a few minutes, are we?
Yes, a few minutes.
Okay, I'll go.
Feel free to take a break, quick break, and come back.
Okay.
Oh, good point, Isaac. That topic came up as well in our breakout room about the connection with other initiatives like Transparent, so I'll mention that as well.
Justine, just a quick one from me. I ended up in a breakout room with another facilitator, so she did the facilitating. Am I good to head off?
Yeah, sorry about that, Amira. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amira, though, for helping.
No worries.
Jana, did you have enough people in the end then? You're muted.
We did have enough people, but it was a bit hard because we were a big bunch of people joining for the presentations and then moving into the rooms. You always lose a few.
Okay.
But I think it should have been fine.
Okay, we still have 54, 55, so it's good. Okay, I will go through the breakout rooms in a minute. So, Jana, the facilitators in the end were Jake, Jan.
So you, myself, Jan, Marta, Tom, Aurora, Annalisa, Jolien. So practically everyone.
Okay. Oh, Jolien as well. Okay, I've got your names and Alex. Alejandra, you said. All right, everyone, well, welcome back to the breakout room, from your breakout room, sorry, from your short break. We'll go through the breakout rooms and the facilitators very quickly and just get 3 key points from them about their motivations and some of the challenges they faced. And we'll also go through that in this next session as well. So there may be a bit of duplication, but I will start off with Tom McKenna.
Thank you. I'll keep it quick. It was just a couple of us in our room. So motivations were around demonstrating environmental value and very business focused. So cost of business and decision making. Challenges was around boundaries of scope, for example, and valuation as well, being quite tricky just to translate those valuation into figures. And then solution, nice and broad, changing the system to make application a lot easier. So yes, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Tom. It's great. You can go now if you like. Thank you. On to Jake next.
Hi, yeah, we had really interesting discussions in our room. So the main motivation was companies sort of having set an ambition or target like net positive and then needing to show progress towards it. So sort of demonstrating progress towards targets. Lots of challenges around it being quite data collection intensive and time consuming, monetary valuation being really useful, but again, just methodologically quite challenging. Challenges around aggregation. So how can we aggregate without losing information? And then a really interesting one about how lots of methods and approaches are developed in Europe and can be quite Eurocentric, and it's quite tricky sometimes to apply them, for example, in Brazil. And a few solutions around engaging and providing clarity to the finance sector and what they should be asking from companies, and some positive feedback that these sort of learnings and exchanges are really useful to enable discussion and verification between different approaches.
Thanks, Jake. That's great. And all of this feedback is really useful for the Align team as well. So these are all some of the issues that we're fronting with the recommendations as well. So thank you. Next, I have Jan.
Yes, I put my takeaways here in the chat just for everyone as awareness. But so I can quickly go. Many of them have been mentioned already. The needs around because of the presence of many consultancies in the call and like in the brain breakout, addressing biodiversity crisis and advising clients in managing that, getting ahead of the curve. Challenges, well, no silver bullet for biodiversity if we compare that to, for example, climate. And there is therefore a need to adapt constantly to different business contexts, sectors, activities, and obviously needs. I think the acceptable level of data and methodologies is a key barrier for businesses. Solutions, how can it be better? Like, I think they mentioned gaining exposure through similar webinars as these ones definitely help sharing best practices, and yeah, that's why the key takeaways on my side.
That's great to hear that the webinars are very useful to people. It's one of the key things that we're trying to look at through the project. So it's good to hear some feedback. Thanks, Jan. Next on to Marta, I think, if I can see you. Marta here. Was Marta facilitating the Indiana? I think we had more facilitators than we needed. So
I think Daniel will do the small summary for Marta.
Okay, Daniel. Thank you very much for that. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yes. So
Hi.
it was super quickly, like we were here in the room, but we pretty much discussed on the challenges. So I don't know if she is here, Charlotte. She shared that for the company that she's working on, like on renewable energies, it comes a matter of data and like how to define accurate, I would call accurate metrics. Is it like at the country level or not, like national level or side-by-side metrics? Because they were thinking of using company-wide metrics. So the main challenge is like operations across the globe, and also like how to compare things within companies, and then like how to factor land use within renewable energies. So that's maybe sometimes part like out of the equation. So to be methane, like one can be like the methane in terms of renewable energies, but then you are like kind of missing that part of the methanes in terms of biodiversity impacts. And then for myself, I just shared that I am doing my PhD on economics of planetary boundaries and developing metrics for linking science-based targets to science-based target networks. So like either company or geographical, like geographically explicit. And then the challenges for me is like the amount of data that I have to use, but also my goal is to develop a metric that can be used for companies, not like this kind of super complex things. Yeah, so that will be our reflection, probably.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, I have Annalisa.
Hi there, Justine. So Annalisa Green, Global Balance and Technical Advisor to the Align project. So we had a range of people in the room, so ranging from people who were working with impact investors to people advising clients on environmental markets to people also advising clients on how to undertake sort of spatial assessments linked to natural capital. So the challenges that people came up with range from the business not having a well-established business case within some clients, real challenges around data gaps, some cases of what I call cultural inertia, so bringing new concepts, new data, new ideas to established players and meeting resistance in terms of sort of scientific challenge and sort of other forms of challenge. And then finally, so some clashes between regulatory regimes if you're operating in more than one, say, country or region that may make it difficult to create a joined up approach and give you an overall comprehensive assessment. The solution, we didn't have very much time, was so recognizing there is a relatively limited pool of people still working in this space, that actually these sort of fora that can exchange ideas and thinking and plug some of those gaps and challenges were really, really valuable. So we're at the stage of this community being really rather important in that respect.
Thank you, Annalisa. And we'll get time in the second half. I think I'll focus more on the solutions because I think we've covered quite a lot already. We had some really good feedback from the breakout sessions on challenges, so that's been great. Thank you. And I think the last, aside from myself, the last person to feedback is Aurora. Is that correct?
Yes, it's me. Yes, so I'm Aurora. I work for the Business and Biodiversity platform. We had a quite small discussion. There was in my group one person from the who works for the network of the science community, and another one which was an independent consultant. The main motivation for learning about natural capital management accounting was because they want to start to implement this. So it's a starting point. And the main challenges discussed were about the data availability, so the lack of data availability, and also about the metrics. In particular, it was discussed that it was, according to one person, it's not possible to have a single metrics, but there should be more metrics. So that's it. We
Thank you. I think it's a good point to start the breakout then. So thank you. That's perfect. And Yolian, sorry, I missed your hand there. Yolian?
Yes. So we also had a nice discussion in our breakout group We had some people from the larger energy companies who had already a lot of knowledge on biodiversity and biodiversity footprinting, for example. Also someone from financial sector. So the main reason to follow this webinar was to keep up to date with the knowledge what is going on with biodiversity next to some more well-known subjects like climate. So some challenges next to the ones that are already mentioned is that for big companies, it's often quite complex to do the assessments with lack of data, and also because where to start in such a big company. But on the other hand, also for small companies, it's more easy to do an assessment, but often they said there's a lack of knowledge in the small companies because they don't have enough manpower or to hire the experts there. For freshwater environments, it was raised that it's sometimes difficult with some connectivity issues. What do you take with you in the assessment? How far do you need to go? Issues with specific species in freshwater environments. And that's for a lot of metrics and programs, a lot of data is used from tropical regions. And then it's the question, how is it also applicable for the European context, for example? And a possible solution would be the development of a tool where companies can track their performance and their improvements over time, something that often is a bit lacking or that businesses are missing.
Thank you. That was really thorough. Thank you very much. So just a feedback from our group as well. So some of the motivations were, and these are almost like criteria as well for developing recommendations, to provide decision makers in the boardroom with simple KPIs. So focusing on simplicity, something that people can understand really easily. Another motivation was trying to understand an aligned approach, having approaches and metrics aligned, in other words. Practicality, so having practical cases. In this case, it was actually a lecturer, so wanting to share practical cases in the classroom. But I think that goes across the board with having cases that are practical to start with. Understanding the nuances between initiatives as well. That came from Larissa Leach from Shell. So we have, through our sister project Transparent, the two projects are closely aligned with a line. We have a really nice overview of all the different initiatives, TNFD and SBTN, and how we're all trying to connect to each other. So we meet regularly with all the initiatives. Some are on our advisory boards. So just to let you know that we're not all working in different silos and not communicating to each other. We are hopefully at the end trying to come up with an aligned approach that is a coherent flow through structure, if that makes sense. It's our dream, our ambition. So that was some of the motivations. Challenges again for us were how to simplify biodiversity as a KPI. There's a number of different ways to categorize nature, species and habitats, and how do you do that in a consistent way? Having a consistent map of ecosystem services would be really helpful, but is applicable, as some people have said, across the globe. And of course, on coming to valuation, a need for defined methodologies, and data as always was an issue. So thank you everyone for that feedback. And Yanis?
Yeah, we also had a
group too.
Yeah,
wow, we had so many groups.
Just very briefly, we had a very lively discussion on the gap between ecologists and the corporate world, and that there is a need to speak the same language, and as you said, like translate targets into clear KPIs, so you can get buy-in from the management and show how you're progressing. And then as a solution, it was proposed to business should hire more ecologists. Well, that's it from our sides.
Thank you so much, Yana. That would be great for the ecologists out there. So we'll go quickly into the second section. I think we'll skip briefly over challenges because I think we've had quite a lot of coverage of that at the moment. But there is a Menti question that we want to ask you, and we do this consistently across our webinars to get coverage across all the different sectors. So if you remember the Menti code from last time, which is on the screen at the moment, 8328317. The next question coming up is, what are the main challenges you see in the application of natural capital approaches? And there's you can, I think, select up to 2. You can vote for 2. So what do you think are the top 2 issues or challenges that you see in applying natural capital approaches? And sorry, that's rather small on the screen, but the first one is lack of internal resources and capacity, lack of buy-in from management, which people haven't picked up on yet, which I don't think it's been mentioned, lack of understanding of the business case, like the need for it, lack of data, obviously, and difficulty of integrating natural capital into internal processes. So it'd be interesting what your responses are on that. We'll spend a little bit of time on this, and then I think we will be really good to interesting to jump to perhaps what we think of some of the solutions. And maybe while waiting for this, if I can ask a question to some of our speakers, who should I ask this one for? I think if I can come back to Mark Johnston from BP. Obviously, you're at the very beginning of your process. What do you see as some of the main challenges for your organisation in applying natural capital management accounting?
Great question. I think first of all, in terms of certainly for large established companies, for us, it's that sort of the green one on your graph about difficulty integrating natural capital into internal processes, because we're quite well established. We've got a large number of different processes already. So the challenge was, how do we actually integrate it into that processes without obviously starting from scratch, which just isn't practical for us to be doing. So that's certainly one of the key challenges. Another thing I mentioned, just where to start. And getting the right level, because we've been trying to look at how you apply natural capital at a very high level across all of our value chains, but that in itself is quite a huge task. So just getting that right level in terms of the number of detail needed to make that assessment and be able to do that over such a large number of different value chains. So that's quite tricky in terms of just getting them to understand, that first step, if you like, when you've got so many different potential value chains. And then how do you bring in your suppliers or the other people in your value chain who you may have data, you may not, or may have relatively limited understanding of natural capital and that side of things. So I think that's probably the three things for us.
I think maybe the next question will help to address some of that. It's more about solutions. So I guess some of the things we picked up on was consistency and alignment. All of those concepts will help to solve some of those problems, hopefully. So just looking at the Minty questions, so we have obviously lack of data is a really important one, and it's not just, it's lack of the right data at the right spatial scale for the right purpose. So it's not just data randomly, but it's data for the right purpose. And we appreciate that. And we'll touch on that, I think, in the recommendations. And then lack of internal resources and capacity. You're right. I mean, it's I don't know, maybe Isak, you can comment on this about the resources needed for the really detailed analysis that you've undertaken. I mean, how many staff does it involve and how much time? Yeah, okay, don't scare everyone.
Yeah, no. It's a lot. It's a lot, really. We began at the very beginning 5-6 years ago with a pilot study with FFI that people will remember in our block 57 in Peru. And after that, we learned many things. We built a team of young dedicated professionals that grew on this. And then we begin to iterate with universities, institutes, and consultant firms. So yeah, it's time consuming and it's expensive. I cannot say all the way around, but at the end of the day, it makes sense. So yeah, it takes time. And capabilities, it's something that we were discussing in our short group. And I fully agree that we need to not only retain consultants in the industry, but also build internal capacities to fully understand the processes and the implications of having and to have informed decisions. So it's both worlds, but yeah, it requires lots of insight and time for sure.
Thank you for providing some solutions there, and I appreciate that idea of collaboration is really important. Research collaboration really helps to solve things. You can't do it on your own, and hopefully through the Align community as well, there's a collaboration there where we can provide some support. If we come on to the Minty, yeah, I'm going to come back to you, Pippa, on the next question. I was going to ask Jan, if you can skip to the next Minty and why people are filling in the next Minty. I was going to ask Pippa in the next question, if that's okay. So if we can skip to the next one, which is about the solutions which could overcome these challenges. So standardization of approaches, for example, is which Align is trying to achieve. So this is a free form question, so please write in your responses in the chat or in here. Yes, Pippa, sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that, you know, the systemic change that's needed to adopt the level of detail in the system that Isaac has demonstrated is an important one. We can't get away from that. And, you know, if we are on a trajectory to nature positive and to kind of changing things and to actually integrating the systemic needs of capacity and systems and you know, around decision making, then that investment is not a surprise, really. I mean, if we're going to do this properly, we need to do it properly. So I just wanted to reflect on that. You know, it's a huge effort that's gone on, and it has taken time, but now it's part of the way Repsol is doing business, and it's showing, because the decisions are coming through, and you know, it's having a real impact on the value, on you know, profit, on you know, the cost of doing business, the social license, all of those things, which are really now just part of their own, and the disclosure on that, you know, they're ready to go, and I think it's a really impressive tool, and there's a lot to learn from it, I think.
In terms of supporting structures that can help that process, what do you think in terms of education and training, how that could be utilized better?
For me, you're asking?
Well, for the industry as a whole, how education and training could help support the industry.
Yeah, and I think you know, it's who's coming through the system too. I mean, you know, industry is really good at graduate schemes and you know, helping bring in new talent and retaining talent and you know, bringing people, I think, into the system early is really good. But there's also the reflection. I mean, based here in Cambridge, I'm absolutely, you know, shocked at what gets taught in the engineering departments here and in the business school, because they really don't approach, you know, natural capital or biodiversity or sustainability in the way that it really should be. So I think there's a lot to learn, you know, to go back into how we are educating people in the system. I mean, I look at my own kids who are coming through school with a lot, or into university, having chosen degrees that would do that, you know, environmental economics or whatever it might be. But actually more traditional, you know, the finance streams, the engineering streams are not really bringing these into the mainstream. It's all peripheral, and it's sort of nice to have. And so I think there's a lot of work that we should start to participate in and actually contribute to yeah, right through the system, and not just specific you know, disciplines.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I come from an academic background myself, and you need more interdisciplinary efforts. So more different departments meeting together, and maybe the health department, or you know, often universities have a hospital attached to them, having the people from the health sectors meeting with the natural capital teams or the economists, and having those more interdisciplinary discussions.
Yeah.
Very valuable.
And I think, you know, this is an interdisciplinary issue. You know, and we can't silo any of these issues anymore. Climate, water, biodiversity, finance, or it's all part of the same, or should be part of the same equation.
There's lots of agreement in the chat on what you're saying, Pippa. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well. So if people have posed questions in the chat, we will share that later. And if there's anything that we haven't answered, we'll come back to our speakers. But I'll just go through this last bit about the solutions, because we've got 7 minutes left. So not surprisingly, standardization is great and required. Open sharing of data across value chains, and the Capitalist Coalition will be looking at a value database. We have there are already some value databases out there that you can connect to, and I can share those in the chat later. So yeah, we were making more effort towards having standardized values and coefficients, having a uniform method, replicability to any project. I'm not sure if these are more challenges than solutions as well. This is our ambition. We sort of don't know how we're going to get there, though. Checking whether metrics indeed point into the good direction in different parts of the world. So having that global perspective, and that standardization provides credibility having agreement on the right metrics, again, data gaps, and a post-2020 biodiversity target framework inclusion of the value chain. And hopefully we'll get that soon with the Commission on Biological Diversity's next meeting. Filling data gaps on location of relevant operations and of value chain. Is there another page to this? No, there's only 8. I think the thing at the bottom is only 8. No, that's great. So if you've got any other comments that you want to add this, please put it in the chat. So just to almost bring this to a close, we have 2 more meaty questions. One is about what lessons learned do you take away from these case studies and what you've heard today. So it's about the value that you've learned from this webinar and what are the most important things that you will take home. And while you're writing in that, I just thought I'd mention as well that one of the other challenges that came up was application in the marine environment. So that's always is still a few yards behind our understanding of the terrestrial environment. And it's also very dynamic, so it's complicated to understand. And there was a discussion in the chat as well about comparing how you can use this information for comparisons, for making comparisons. I think there's a good discussion between Daniel and Navinda about comparing actions against a base year or your initial goals. And that it's very hard to compare across projects, particularly when they may be operating in different countries. Isaac, I really liked your last slide where you talked about some of the criteria of it being practical. Maybe these are solutions: practical, relevant, scalable. So again, that comes into that local versus global aspect, I think. Is that what you're looking at? Tending there, and consistent, verifiable, and measurable. So I think these are all very good criteria to aim towards.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of lessons learned, really good. So impacts can be quantified. So no one was too daunted by what you presented there, Isaac. I mean, it was very detailed, but I think it was inspiring to people that they can get there, but it takes some commitment and collaboration. Including natural capital and decision making can be systematically done with the right tools and awareness, and I would probably say the right collaborations and teams and people. Need to look at NPV and integration of natural capital. So that it's someone saying that they need to do that now, or that it's possible. Not sure if you want to clarify that in the chat. That'd be great. Some corporations seem to be taking the lead, but there are still many challenges ahead. That's right. I mean, we're seeing today from a few leaders in the field, but there's still many more companies out there. So we're really just touching the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot of people to follow and just who need that support and coming through. That the pioneers have come a long way in generating methods to follow up on targets. So that's just what I said. Yeah, it's great. This is complex but doable, so it's inspiring to hear. It's good, and needs the necessary investment and thought to integrate this into corporate systems. A good tool for go, no go situations. And that data is gold. Poor data equals poor disclosure. That's correct. So we need, it's not just having data per se, it's the right data. It's a brave new world. Keep going, those of you tackling this together. Yeah, we need some hope and inspiration at the moment, don't we, in the world at the moment? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. So I think at that point now I will, I think there's one more minty question, actually. Am I right, Yana? There's one about the research and training requirements revealed by the case studies. If we've got quick time to fill that in. And then I'll just go, while you're filling that in, I'll go through the summary and close up and the next steps for the project. So Align started in March 2021 and it's running for 3 years. So all of the feedback that we've had today will go into helping to shape the recommendations. We currently have a draft, which I mentioned is going through the technical hub at the moment. And a lot of what we've heard today is consistent with some of the feedback we've had from other sectors. So it would be very helpful for what we're developing. In more particular, the slides, the recordings, and we have some case study blurbs on what people have presented today that will be shared with you if it hasn't already. And so, yeah, the slides and recordings will also be shared, or a PDF of those. And also we'll put together some key takeaways. So a kind of combination of the notes from the breakout rooms, what's in the chat, and some of the discussions that we've had today. We'll put that into some sort of coherent structure for your reference. So yeah, in the last minute, I think finally just a massive thank you to our speakers for bringing your wealth of expertise here today and inspiring us and inspiring everyone that this is doable, and no matter where you're on the footpath, there are people around you to help you. So thank you very much, Pippa, Mark, Isaac, and Dr. Rao, if you're still online from India. Thank you so much for joining so late in the night. Thank you to all my moderators and facilitators, and thank you, of course, to ICF and Jana for helping to run the webinar and technicalities today. Thank you so much, everyone, and please do keep in touch. If you've got any questions, want to join the online community, please get in touch with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Isaac.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Tippa. I hope that was useful to you as well today. Oh, you're muted.